My apologies to Kron Man. Kron Man is not Superman, Iron Man, Batman, Wonder Woman, the greatest American hero, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Captain America, Thor, Spider-Man, Hellboy, Captain Planet, Spawn, Star-Lord, Luke Cage, Colossus, Deadpool, Kitty Pryde, Daredevil, Human Torch, Cyclops, Green Lantern, Jesse Custer, Danny Moonstar, Shuri, Catwoman, Black Lightning, Isis, Elastigirl, Aquaman, Rogue, Ant-Man, Captain Marvel, Storm, Jean Grey, The Wasp, Supergirl, Namor and the Submariner, Dr. Manhattan, Doctor Strange, Black Widow, and the Punisher. Yikes. What the hell? Who started all this superhero blather? Here in the United States, it all started on June 30th, 1938. Writer Joel Siegel and artist Joe Shuster in the comic book Action Comics #1, and here it is. Siegel's story from 1933, The Reign of Superman, illustrated by Shuster, was published by these guys in a sci-fi magazine. The villain's telepathy drives the story. Siegel upgraded Superman, as the name implies. Superman, who arrived from far away in the universe. Then Superman became a comic strip, and thus begins the parade of superheroes. What about the gods? Think about it. They did all sorts of super things, each within their own shtick. Don't think so? Stay out of the way of thunderbolts. Zeus. Mercury? Put Mercury in the Olympics. Take the goddess Venus, the goddess of love, beauty, and seduction. Well, I'll leave it at that. They all have specific character traits, and the idea of beings associated with great powers and heroes started very early. Joseph Campbell lectures on the Homerific legends. Paul Bunyan, this guy was huge. Think about what I have alluded to about the shtick. All the superheroes have their gig, which is good because it gives the character a raison d'etre. No Google translation here. Remember, reason of being. It's all mapped out for the adventure. Kron Man, mega human good guy. The series relies on locality in the way that the TV Superman of the 1950s was set in Metropolis and Batman in Gotham City. Kron Man is set in Camden Bay, New York. Of course, there's always an adversary, yep. Overcoming evil. Batman had a whole host of characters he confronted in both the TV series and the movies. Superman had the local hoods on TV, and in the movies, Lex Luthor had a prominent adversarial role. Kron Man in the first novel has an archenemy, Junior Janus. He's a sleaze, a thief, a liar, and will do anything to advance his own interests. Sidekicks. Batman, Robin, Superman, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen. First season of Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, a sidekick/love interest in Cage. My sidekick is more like Sam Beckett's nutcase Rear Admiral, Albert Al Calavici. Randy Kron is just a mechanic out of the surface, an average guy like Ralph in The Greatest American Hero. Robert Culp was great as his sidekick. Kron's sidekick is an unethical chiseler named Eddie Conover. Kron develops a love interest as the novel progresses and has the stable character, his sister Julie, all adjusting to his new identity. Kron Man is more TV than it is comic. Ralph has the alien suit, which is hilarious. When I wrote Kron, I researched about abductions and wanted his body to be altered by the shadow alien. Inside my head, I first envisioned Kron, unnamed at the time, while shopping at a Colorado Boulevard two-level mall in Pasadena, California, now the Paseo. What if a superhero could simply fly from the first level around the vaulted ceiling? You never know what the heck's going on. The blue area is where I'm standing. What about the sci-fi? Well, Randy Kron can friggin' fly. Eddie finds this out right away and of course tries to exploit it. Kron Man can survive incredible power. The other prominent piece of sci-fi is Kron Man's residence. He realizes he wants to use his prodigious power for good. That's the deal with Kron Man, RPF. So why is the 1939 World's Fair so important? There have been other fairs before and after the 1939 New York World's Fair. The first time I became aware of the 1939 fair was in my grandmother's attic, which was walkable on a wood plank floor, and the high gables of the Victorian house gave it a spacious aura. There were numerous books about geography and non-picture books that caught my eye, but what fascinated me was this astounding exposition of geometric structures with powerful names such as Westinghouse, General Electric, Ford, General Motors, and RCA. In my mind, I walked the colored pathways under the omnipresent Trilon and Perisphere, as seen on the book cover above. And the biggest impression I got at age 9 or 10 was that they were predicting the future, and after the Great Depression, they were speculating on a bright future. As the years went by, thoughts about the fair floated around my brain. I saw documentaries and films of the fair where they actually buried a time capsule in the ground to be opened 5,000 years in the future. It wasn't until I began acquiring a sense and knowledge of history that I revisited the New York World's Fair. That fair posited a number of ideas that came into fruition. Superhighways. In 1939, there was a freeway between Pasadena into LA and the Autobahn in Germany, but most of American roadways, from what I studied, were in rough shape or non-existent until Eisenhower's interstate highway initiatives. And TV. TV was held up until World War II was over. Thanks a lot, Hitler. But when the fair opened on April 30th, 1939, Roosevelt was on a broadcast to New York City. At the fair, there was also a robot named Electro, and communities mirroring the future suburban spread. So what? What's the big deal? The time capsule is the big deal, and the unabashed optimism promoted at the fair. When I put that together in my head, I started wondering about the future and these people of 1939. Just look how society has changed in 82 years. If we go ahead to the distant future, does humanity maintain freedom? Do we have standards? What about the technology of the fair? Does it proceed into the future thoughtfully with consideration of its ramifications? The catchphrase of the fair was, "I have seen the future." What would we see if the future, and even the distant future, were on full display? In Iowa, 1939. No, this isn't Fitton's version of the Field of Dreams, but it isn't bad. I'm not talking about a perfect, idyllic world. After all, the absence of electricity in many places forced a human connection. I'm strongly making the point that some values such as integrity, justice, and moral certitude existed in 1939 Iowa and in much of the country. I'm not naive in my understanding of society's underbelly. However, there were societal norms. I'm not being sentimental either. Most of these norms protected everyone while technology eviscerated individual freedom in Andy Reese's future world. Even more distant is the Enclave, escaped to Ganymede around Jupiter as they prepare to die and end human existence. Professor Geiger is the messiah not of wiping out technology, but of paying attention to the collateral damage. Andy Reese, an exoplanet astronomer living in the distant future, contacts the Enclave, the last vestige of humanity, to stop the annihilation of the human race by the Seraph, post-biological life forms. Reese is sent back along the timeline to prevent the evolution of the Seraph from computers. The link in time is an Iowa farm girl, Lucy Appel, who has won a national contest to travel to the 1939 New York World's Fair, and Professor Hermann Geiger, a gifted scientist and writer and social philosopher. To change history, Reese must avert Geiger's death at the fair, but the Seraph have other plans as they follow Reese back to 1939 to thwart changing history. Book description from Amazon. Andy Reese meets and falls in love with a young woman, Lucy Appel, whose brilliance is apparent. Lucy's future holds great prospects for her. Professor Geiger is her idol in the way he thinks about science and the future. Lucy gets to meet Geiger at the New York World's Fair, but the Seraph is inhabiting human bodies and is lurking. Okay, Fitton, can't you make your point without bringing out this artificial intelligence and the lost humans on Ganymede? Sure, but bringing out the contrast between the time periods in a narrative experienced by humans is an essential way to understand the future. Do humans have to battle the Seraph? Oh yes, because they are the products of the runaway technology. Is Professor Geiger really necessary? You bet he's necessary. Geiger espouses the positive nature of humanity, using the human power to reason and understand the possibilities of technology. But he cautions us to be aware of the side effects. As the technologies advance, we must have that attitude, to think, not thinking. Here is a complete podcast list for I Have Seen the Future. 7 episodes with the audiobook sandwiched in between. The clean version of the book is available at Audible without the podcast. Cobb, Harry Cobb. Despite his lack of character, Jason Rapp did not deserve a death sentence. I had enjoyed a pleasant shuttle flight from Orbitus to Mars until Rapp's call rattled my zip connection. The wind howled and the sand grains pattered against the rover's bubble top, suggesting a severe dust storm. He said someone in a silver terrain suit, brandishing a pinpoint pulsar, had hiked through the Martian ridge shadows. Rapp sensed a murderous intent. Beginning of the dust of Mars. When I was in grade school, my first knowledge of Mars came from a catchy phrase, the Red Planet. Then somebody said that Mars was the god of war. Were there Martian soldiers on the planet Mars? That required a trip to the library. That's when I really got confused, and rightly so. I opened an older hardcover book on Mars. The hell was this? A Martian workforce of Martian canal diggers? Who found out about the canals? I didn't know about Percival Lowell, the purveyor of that disinformation, but the idea of canals on Mars remained in my head for a long time. With the canals, there must be Martians. I heard about the War of the Worlds as adapted by Orson Welles. Add that to the Fitton consciousness. I think I was more impressed that Welles faked everybody out back in 1938 with his Mercury Theater of the Air broadcast and that dramatic voice. Then I bought the pocket book of the stars and planets. Things changed. I didn't see any interviews with Martians bragging about their canals. Perhaps there were dust storms and ice caps. Maybe some type of atmosphere. A further distance from the sun. All scientific knowledge about that was understandable. And then I saw the original Invaders from Mars around this time, and happily suspended my disbelief to be scared by the movie. In college, I took an elective course on astronomy, which included updated speculation about the actual planet Mars. By then, the US had flown by and orbited Mars. The Soviets were the first to land, but the communication failed. It was Cosmos by Carl Sagan that gave us his personal journey to Mars, as well as debunking Percival Lowell. But he also traced the rocketry of Robert Goddard to the Viking 1 and 2 landings on Mars. By then, I hadn't lost my imagination with the exit of Lowell on the canal. Buttressed by the old Edgar Rice Burroughs books about John Carter that Sagan read as a kid, I thought about something different. Why not have a book with the solar system 200 years from now? I asked a mystery writer if I could mix a mystery with the sci-fi. She was firmly on the planet Earth, and I was reaching for the stars. But I did it anyways. Enter Harry Cobb. Yes, Harry Cobb is in the future, but I wanted humans to act like humans. Guess that's why I started out with a murder, Jason Rapp. And a murderer, I'm not telling. Humans acting like humans. Cobb discovering an old love and a hard-nosed former agent becoming flustered upon seeing her and enamored upon being with her, Ariana. Loyalty, Cobb's trusted associate Rennie Colburn. Camaraderie, Inspector John Patno, Harry Cobb's friend of many years. Chicanery, that becomes evident. Humans being human was a theme in the book, but more than that, being able to bring a narrative to the Martian surface and dome's environment was rewarding. One dome, Barsoom, is named after Edgar Rice Burroughs' designation by the natives for the planet Mars. As Tropical Storm Elsa swirls up the Atlantic seaboard and over Cape Cod, I swirl into the weekend and will return on Monday. Adios. Postscript. Great artist rendition of Mars and domes, like in the Harry Cobb series. Good Monday morning from the Fitton on the Air podcast. No, this post isn't about Glinda the Good Witch and her spell sending Dorothy back to Kansas, but the phrase is most assuredly, unequivocally hijacked from that spell. Those words written by L. Frank Baum over a century ago get to the heart of many a good Kansas man or woman. Looks as if Glinda was truly a good deed doer. A good deed doer. I bet Glinda wouldn't screw up the Pythagorean theorem like the Scarecrow who proclaimed, "In an isosceles triangle, the sum of the square roots of the two sides is the square root of the third side." The wizard set the bar real low. Nor can I snap off the Pythagorean theorem even at my best moment. In any right-angled triangle, the sum of the squares on the two sides is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. The wizard who worked with hot air balloons at the Kansas Fair didn't even know how the thing worked. Hold everything. This post is not about the Wizard of Oz. It's about a short story I wrote when I was in California, and it's contained in the book Compilation with other short stories and novellas. A successful young man comes back with his fiancée to part of his childhood that is best left in the shadows. Don Murdoch has made a fatal mistake. Murdoch insists that his fiancée return in a week while he gets Aunt Greta's old house up for sale. What Don Murdoch doesn't know is that he is merged into the shadows where reality becomes past, present, and future in an instant. Wonder what I was watching on Los Angeles television back then. No Place Like Home fits the Twilight Zone format of entering an area beyond time and space. Letting our imaginations go wild is also the hallmark of the Twilight Zone. After meeting with old friends, Murdoch returns to Aunt Greta's house. To his shock, he sees his late Aunt Greta in one of the upper windows. Murdoch searches the house but finds nothing. He hears noises around the house as he tries to sleep, but the nightmares begin on cue as he nods off. Through the week, Murdoch repairs the house, meets with his old buddies, the Crandall boys, and enjoys being back. He would call the realtor tomorrow. When Don Murdoch wakes up the next morning, something has happened. He soon realizes from the radio report it's 1963 inside the house. November 22nd, 1963. Aunt Greta is alive and telling him to take his medicine as if he were a little boy. The situation is that unexplained confrontation with reality. Here's how Rod Serling opened the first season of The Twilight Zone in 1959. He said there is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. A dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. In the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of the imagination. November 22nd, 1963, the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. I had begun studying the Kennedy assassination after listening to Mark Lane at UMass and viewing the Zapruder film. I walked out of the campus center, realizing Kennedy's head and body was thrown backward, hardly the actions of a lone gunman. Today, after a congressional investigation in the AARB, thousands of documents indicate a well-orchestrated plot, within elements of the CIA, portions of the anti-Castro paramilitary, and the upper levels of government. And there was a massive and pervasive cover-up, as Don Murdoch will soon understand. The end for President Kennedy and for Murdoch is not good. Simply put, in my short story, the FBI has the info and does nothing. Since I wrote the story, a teletype was found and dated before Dallas, warning of an assassination attempt on President Kennedy. 1963 twisted into the present like the strands of the infinity symbol, leaving Murdoch's fiancée wondering if she's been living in a dream world. In the book Compilation, I have assembled short stories and novellas, available in audio, paperback, and Kindle. Hey, wizard! Shut up, whippersnapper! If there's no place like home, what the hell were you doing in Oz all these years?
And a couple of tra-la-las. That's how we laugh the day away in the very
I bet he can't even fly this balloon.
Chirp, 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 and a couple of la-dee-das. That's how the crickets shriek all day in the merry old land.
This is Tuesday, and I'm Robert P. Fitton, a cyborg with a screw loose. There have been so many stories and movies about cyborgs and androids. I remember comfortably sitting in my theater seat in front of a massive stage curtain. It was 1983 and Harrison Ford had just zoomed into stardom in the 70s. The curtain opened ever so slowly to the largest movie screen I had ever seen before or since. I'm sure it was 70mm. It was as if I was right there as bounty hunter Rick Deckard Ford pursues a gaggle of replicants, specifically the Nexus 6 model. They've just killed 23 people in a space colony. We all know Darth Vader's penchants for revenge and violence. Nevertheless, Anakin Skywalker is the chosen one. Even when Anakin turns into Darth Vader, he remains the chosen one. I first saw Darth Vader on a movie screen at the Mountain Farms 4 theaters in Hadley, Massachusetts. The screen was not much larger than the TV in the front room here in 2021. Then we have The $6 Million Man Who Was Bionic. That was the first program I ever taped on VCR. The Cylons were in Battlestar Galactica, 2004 edition, and I guess I'll throw in Inspector Gadget. And let's not forget Arnold. I remember the end of the Terminator movie when just a piece of that cyborg was left to fight. Creepy. There's an unmitigated fear of the all-powerful. Harlan Ellison said he loved the movie, he was just blown away by it. Who? The primary motivation of a Dalek is to destroy anything that is not like, even to the point of internal destruction when a rogue Dalek fails to conform. The primary motivation of a Cyberman is to create like as it's now the only way to reproduce. I was reluctant to write an entire novel about a being who is a mixture of human genetic structure and a conglomeration of advanced electronic substitutes and enhancements, because it's all been done before, but not the way I put this book together. I wanted this being to be in control of a late 20th century planet that also contains dramatic technological advances, prime of which is the cyvacking of humans into compliant duplications of his body structure. Here's what I did. The Galactic Command Marichelli project creating this dumbbell has messed up. So what we have here is a cyborg type named Saul, whose brain is not working quite right, and he rules the planet Scavia Tangle. Now it gets interesting, because Saul has the power to move into the galaxy and cyvac entire populations. Saul manipulates the military for his own ends and keeps Saul City, that paradise personified, in a perpetual state of terrorism, destruction, and death. Saul has cohorts that I won't mention here. But I wanted a subplot as important as the main plot, angled into this morass on Scavia Tangle. The book is the second book in the Galactic Command series. Commander John Ross is scheduled for an extended vacation with his family on a spaceliner type of recreation vehicle. What Ross fears even more than his mortal enemies, the Antarians, is spending any time with his father. John Ross Sr. works for the Command Intelligence. His life has consisted of time away from his family. The old man is distant and has his own way of looking at the world. Ross asks his trusted second-in-command and close friend, Hugh Lindsay, to accompany him on vacation. A good portion of his crew will be working on an aqueduct project on a faraway planet. This isn't a theme about an author not getting along with his father, because my dad was always there for me. Setting up this scenario between these two men is asking for a confrontation. And here's the real problem for Ross. The ship carrying Commander Ross's family has been captured by a tug-drag beam to the planet Scavia Tangle. These elements, along with Ross trying to evade Saul and his family at the risk of being turned into half-humans, makes Reunion an exciting book. And remember, Ross is forced into a situation where he has to speak to his father and confront his own demons as he joins forces with his father against Saul. It was really fun to do Saul's voice, complete with the disjointed sentences and sketchy judgment. His temperament is edgy.
Revac, I will. Revac, I will.
Put a little echo in there and maybe a little metallic reverb, and we have Saul's voice. And his decisions spread fear across the planet. This is why I like this book with this half-human who is not all there but in charge. There's a tried and true doctor's definition for Saul's condition. Microdechia, playing with less than a full deck. That's all, folks. Postscript. Edgar Allan Poe. the man that was used up. A general who was desecrated by Indians, his hacked up body parts have been replaced by prosthetic devices. Before appearing in public, he must reinstall the prosthetic devices into his body. The narrator now understands the general's great secret. Poe's catchphrase, "He was the man that was used up." Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a fictional correspondence between Captain Robert Walton and his sister Margaret, is detailed here in this audio. I'm Robert P. Fitton.
Revac. Implement.
It's Thursday, science fiction and imagined science fiction laws. It's 1608, ladies and gentlemen, and a prescient mathematics teacher from Graz in Austria wrote his Somnium, the dream. I dream all the time and occasionally find myself visualizing planets and stars or moons in my nocturnal journeys. Here in 2021, we've had decades of cinema productions with brilliant graphics and actual missions into orbit, the moon, Mars, and other celestial bodies in the solar system. Pixel after pixel is beamed through space, producing stunning representations of other worlds. For this mathematics teacher in 1608, the only fuel for his dream were his study of the planets, his imagination, and his ferocious desire to reach beyond the bounds of Earth. Johannes Kepler spoke of traveling 50,000 miles up in an area above the terrestrial sphere, the ether, into the island of Livonia. And here it is, the moon, of course. Kepler writes about the extreme cold and about having to slow down as to not crash into the moon, which is indicative of spacecraft approaching the gravity of any celestial body. He visualizes perspective from the celestial bodies, distance determining what we see, which is not the actual size of the body. I'll give him a pass for writing about plant growth on the moon or using exotic herbs to lift him skyward, but award him the Celestial Garden Club Award for creativity and imagination. I don't intend to besmirch Kepler. After all, the guy reasoned out the laws of planetary motion. 1. Planets move around the sun in ellipses, with the sun at one focus. 2. The line connecting the sun to the planet sweeps in equal areas and equal times. 3. The square of the orbital period of a planet is proportional to the cube, third power, of the mean distance from the sun. In Galactic Command, you will not read about Fitton's scientific laws about anything. What you'll get is imagination and humans working together in space. Imagination law number 1. How does that ESS ship of the future bring John Ross and his crew through space? Coils, of course, squeezing through the fabric of space utilizing a special power source. You can do anything you think you can, Christopher Reeve. Imagination law number 2. Let's just say there's a horrible medical condition in the Nebula Planet story, and a brilliant way to cure it, and other obstacles. It's only Dr. Pfeiffer's tenacity that results in a new and different way to combat incurable diseases and a perplexing problem for the crew of ESS-14. An attempt at visualizing the fourth dimension. Take a point, stretch it to a line, curl it into a circle, twist it into a sphere, and punch through the sphere. I'll do that, thank you, Einstein. Imagination law number 3. Traveling or leaping through unseen dimensions. When I read about quantum physicists speaking about 11 dimensions, I start looking under the Oriental rug. Thus, there is a theoretical basis for dimensions. So I took it a step further. Let's hop inside one of those dimensions. Having a legendary command scientist on call, Dr. Howard Ellison in the story, facilitates this astounding breakthrough. Being able to see through the dimension is strategically beneficial to Commander Ross. A Dyson sphere was originally a thought experiment. How would space travelers from the home planet find a new source of energy when they can't generate enough energy on the home planet? The sphere encapsulates the home planet and captures prodigious energy for the home planet. A Dyson sphere is not new to science fiction, but the reason for the enclosure around the Marsovic people's star is a cause for concern. The power of an alien civilization to transpose and disperse matter to another part of the universe is not just bizarre but frightening. The Masari people have justification for utilizing this inconceivable technology. The idea for this transposition of matter came when personal computers were just on the scene, and being able to move the text around a document after years of typing on paper was magic. There's no planet consisting of a nebula. Rather, the nebula planet in the book is at the farthest end of the galaxy and is overshadowed by the massive nebula. Interesting to visualize that. Galactic Command has never encountered an alien civilization until this extremely long voyage, but there are only extraterrestrial bodies on the nebula planet. There's a whole lot more inside that nebula. Humans being humans. Just because men and women go into space doesn't mean they become new forms of themselves. Knitting together any story are relationships. Commander Ross had a long friendship with the correspondent, the Bender, Nancy Burke. Ross recounts their past experiences together. In an evolving way, Ross develops relationships with his crew, especially Lindy, his second in command. Even the crusty engineer, Frank Muldoon, and Ross are friends, with mutual respect for each other's abilities. This ups the stakes when Crutch Kuczynski, Ross's security officer, arrests them at the beginning of the book. And we look into the past with Ross's best friend, Craig Duggan, killed at the Battle of Marigot against the Antarians. Although Dr. Pfeiffer is able to beat Ross in martial arts, Ross and Pfeiffer are still close friends. There are ancillary characters like the utility man Rip or the sky pilot leader Jim Morris, but the crew remains solidified in a cohesive unit on and off the ship. But there are traitors too. And with humans being humans, we have the despicable, the traitorous, and the self-serving Commander Jack Bragg, the typical commander gone bad. Bragg will seemingly be an obstacle to Ross now and forevermore. Ross's family is important to him, his sister Deborah and his brothers Cappy and Wayne. It's Ross's father, John Ross Sr., whose shadow follows Ross around the galaxy. The ship's Polonus. The great thing about Polonus is that he hates Frank Muldoon, and the feeling is mutual. Muldoon will gladly work himself into a frenzy arguing with the machine, who tries to goad him at every opportunity. Polonus is smart, able to solve problems, and somewhat emotional, and he transcends the ship to the transport vehicles and the crew's personal computers. And what about the Marsovic people? I wanted the first contact to be unique and not what Galactic Command was expecting. Life forms do what they have to do. RPF. Just a hint, but it is Friday. The hero's adventure. The adventure that the hero is ready for is the one that he gets. Joseph Campbell, 1904 to 1987. Our hero works as a buyer in the Rumford Tower, downtown New York City in 1927. He has arrived from Ohio, heading from the country to the big city like many an ambitious ladder climber in the wild and prosperous 1920s. Some found success. Charlie Russo not only positioned himself as one of the top men in E.B. Rumford's company, but he's engaged to the owner's daughter, and the Rumfords have unimaginable wealth. With homes in Connecticut and Newport, Rhode Island, the Rumford's daughter, Francine, is accustomed to being pampered. Despite his achievement, Charlie does not feel fulfilled. Francine is driving him crazy, and he's not prepared to step to an even higher position for his future father-in-law. It's 1927, and Charlie Russo is a fanatic when it comes to the New York Yankees, who, in 1927, have constructed perhaps the greatest team ever to take a baseball field. Charlie constantly follows the Yankees to the consternation of Francine. Charlie, like the Yankees, has a sense of destiny. Babe Ruth chasing the single-season home run record is the epitome of having it all. Under the grandstand, Charlie is taken by a tall, lean, freckle-faced young woman with a carry-on bag. As he strikes up a conversation with this woman with the short auburn hair, he realizes she is mysterious, smart, and for Charlie Russo, somehow, she appears to be part of his personal destiny. Her name is Jamal, and she has an intuitive knowledge of history, even the history that has not yet come to be. Still cognizant of his commitment to Francine, Charlie does not follow her to the turnstiles, a decision he will regret as he returns to his friends in the box seats. He watches Ruth and Garrick on the field, but his mind is back with that stunning woman he let slip his grasp. Enter Charles Lindbergh. Charlie is fascinated with Lindbergh's solo attempt to fly the Atlantic. It is that inner destiny beyond the superficial that fires up Charlie to drive his packet, a gift from Francine, to Roosevelt Field on Long Island early in the morning of May 20th, 1927. Destiny has a way of capturing what Joseph Campbell called serendipity. In the crowd, past hundreds of cars in the field, Charlie spots the woman, bag strapped over her shoulder, from under the grandstand of Yankee Stadium. Jamal is as delighted to see Charlie as he is enamored by her presence. She speaks emotionally as if she already knows about Lindbergh and the flight to Paris. Charlie learns the truth. Charlie hugs Jamal and jumps up and down as Lindbergh barely clears the telephone wires. He later drives Jamal back to Columbus Circle in New York City, and he follows her to her flat. He soon discovers that she is not from this time period and is on a mission to prevent the destruction of humanity by the Avigis of the future. In the bag is Elf, a sophisticated computer. Jamal must gather rare elements to build a transmitter to warn of an extraterrestrial race of the past. The adventure begins. The road of any adventure is filled with obstacles and pitfalls. The Bureau of Investigation, forerunner of the FBI, with likable agents Pearson and Ellery, led by Agent Giff, soon are surveilling Jamal and Charlie because of a tip from one of Francine's suitors. Charlie and Jamal attend a huge parade in New York City that acknowledges Lindbergh's achievement. Charlie did not think that he and Jamal would be captured in black and white by film crews covering the parade. The fall from grace from the Rumfords and the threat to humanity. Not only is Francine rumored to have begun an affair with the man from Chicago, but Charlie's relationship with Jamal is outed in a dramatic way. All his hard work, his rise to success, explodes like fireworks in the night. As Jamal continues with her transmitter work, Charlie arranges with his friend Herbie to house the transmitter atop the Rumford building. Elf has found through her reading that her comrades have come back through time and are locked in an electromagnetic continuum near Niagara Falls. At the same time, they must travel to Boston to get neon from the university source for her transmitter. Boston and beyond. Traveling on one of the first commercial flights between New York and Boston, and followed by Giff and his boys, Charlie and Jamal make arrangements to purchase neon canisters. In Boston, outside the theater district near Scollay Square, Jamal reveals with Elf a three-dimensional scenario of her time period 10,000 years in the future. Just before linking up with the Neon and Giff at Fenway Park in the Red Sox-Yankees game, where Ruth hits 2 home runs, Jamal learns that the belligerent killing race called the Avigis have exited the continuum and are after Jamal to stop her mission. They find a pilot named Langley who begins an aerial trek between cities toward Niagara Falls to find her friends from the future. Niagara Falls and the continuum. The action and adventure gets ratcheted up when Charlie and Jamal land in the city of Niagara Falls. The Avigis are aware that Charlie and Jamal are in the Niagara Falls area. What they find at the generating plant prompts a pursuit that leads back to New York City. Steeped within the events and culture of the time, the confrontation has a determining factor. Without successfully destroying the Avigis, the distant future will produce a timeline where humanity is wiped out. The book's climax will come atop the Rumford Tower, but the culmination of the hero's journey ends in triumph across town. And remember, this is Babe Ruth's hero journey too. In the locker room after the game, Ruth proclaimed,
60, count 'em, 60. Let's see some other son of a bitch topped out.
Charlie and Ruth have gone full circle from the beginning of the journey. The essence of the journey is overcoming the obstacles. Both Charlie and Ruth were ready to do just that. It's Friday. Have a great weekend. RPF. Where have you gone, Harrison Mobley? The patriarch of Hamilton, New Hampshire, the bombastic, the all-powerful, sometimes dictator and very, very rich, Hamilton Fletcher, has agreed to attend a small gathering at Coach Matthias Jones's Colonial on the Common in Hamilton, New Hampshire. Nothing spectacular, right? For as long as he has known Matthias Jones, Hamilton Fletcher has categorically and emphatically refused to set foot on Jones's property. Maybe the passage of time has numbed Hamilton Fletcher, although it's probably more a matter of money and power, which are the driving forces of his life. All is well on Jones's patio. Jones is suspicious of Hamilton Fletcher's appearance at his cookout. On the patio is Father Jim Gallagher in street clothes and the Dean of Students at Hamilton College, Nigel Kent. On the patio radio is the obnoxious Arlo Wombat, a radio personality who travels around the area in a van while he's on the air. Wombat particularly annoys Hamilton Fletcher. Let's drop in on the conversation and the subsequent calamity. Harrison Mobley lived in Jones's home 25 years ago, and incredibly, Hamilton Fletcher has not shed the animosity for the man. Mobley was an athlete, specifically a boxer, and Lark Larson's assistant coach in the day. It was Froggy Finley who challenged Mobley to a boxing exhibition in the old gymnasium and was knocked to the mat over a dozen times. Mobley overheard talk of an underhanded deal with Mickey Snowden, a gangster from Boston, and Hamilton Fletcher. That led to a confrontation with Hamilton Fletcher at Mobley's house, which continued for months. The result was the big blowout, with numerous individuals upset with Mobley. Just a short time later, Mobley and his girlfriend left town. When Jones prepares to redo his patio, Miriam Kendall Lincoln, the local historical society chairwoman, claims that Jones is violating historic rules and regulations, and Miriam Kendall Lincoln's husband is Mayor Picada's lawyer in Prince William. As Jones prepares for the Morgan State game, Arnie Dewars calls and begins describing what he saw through the binoculars at age 12, the sordid details of Harrison Mobley's love life at Jones's Colonial. Jones later begins to wonder what happened to Harrison Mobley and his girlfriend. Jones, in casual conversation, learns that Arnie Dewars claimed there was a shot fired in his Colonial on the night that Mobley and his girlfriend left town. And Coco knows things about that night 25 years ago that he doesn't want to talk about. Jones cautions himself because whatever happened long ago. Tom McGill further arouses Jones's suspicions when he mentions that the former editor of his paper wrote an entire story about the big blowout. Hamilton Fletcher spiked the story, and Jones becomes very curious. When Bucky said Mobley was murdered, Jones agrees with the general consensus that Mobley and his girlfriend left town. Arnie relays more details about what went on that night. Again, Jones is wondering about Mickey Snowden and the shot. Strickland tells Jones that nothing exists about Mobley on the background checks. Strickland has the old police logs. Lark and a well-dressed man were involved in a ruckus at Jones's house. So was Hamilton Fletcher. Tom McGill has retrieved Jerry St. Clair's 5 articles about Hamilton Fletcher and the funding of the school by Mickey Snowden. Mobley heard about the deal. It got back to Snowden and Mobley left town, or so it seems. McGill's secretary runs in and says Jones's Jeep is on fire. Coco then tells Jones, "Somebody doesn't want you looking into Mobley." Strickland has the background check on Mobley, and it shows that he doesn't exist. In a meeting with Coco and Hamilton Fletcher about the bad feeling between Mobley and Hamilton, Jones learns that Mobley was going to call the DA on Hamilton Fletcher. Then Hamilton went over to the Colonial. Mickey Snowden showed up and shot Mobley. Later, the house was cleaned and no records now exist for Mobley being treated for a gunshot. Lark Larson, drunk, staggered into the Colonial. All the while, a Toyota was circling the Common. The girlfriend got in the Toyota. That's how 6 Feet Under starts, but there's a lot more to the story, including an Uncle Dulio moment. And there's a Bucky Driscoll subplot. Eventually, Jones is convinced there was a murder and begins to unravel the deed after 25 years. RPF. Johnny's Back in Town, Part 1. Murder, Mayhem, and Monkey Business. Last night I was happy to get my copy of the latest Matthias Jones book, Johnny's Back in Town. The Matthias Jones series is not your typical murder mystery. You think, Fitton? Jones is a coach of 3 sports at Hamilton College in fictitious Hamilton, New Hampshire. That's what he was hired to do. By golly, Jones just happens to be up to his eyeballs in murder investigations. Does Jones have a penchant for chasing ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars? No, that's not it. He does, however, have a knack for tracking down murderers. Call that intuition, or as Jones says, a side road theory. Add persistence into the investigative mix. The college tolerates and accepts that Jones is called into action every time there's a murder. And the cops, like the college, have no problem with Jones in the middle of investigations. Let's take the scenario a step further. Jones is best friends with Coco Stefani, a local hood connected to the mob and owner of the infamous Club Max in the neighboring city of Prince William. Sometimes in the course of investigation, Jones and Coco are involved with the Boston Mafia and assorted other thugs. So Jones is out of town a lot, but hark! He manages to conduct practices, play games, and have a superb record anyway. Jones's fascination sounds more like a hobby, but less than an occupation. Investigating murders was the occupation of Jones's father. When his father is murdered, it is Jones, along with Coco, who solves Bill Jones's murder. The Matthias Jones series is to Perry Mason as Hogan's Heroes was to Billy Wilder's Starlock 17. Hogan's was not real, but it's easy to suspend disbelief because Hogan and the boys outwitted the Germans, and it was fun, and so were the characters. The premise of a counterinsurgency operating out of a POW camp is outrageous. It's the character flaws and egos, as well as Hogan's cunning, that fuels the laughter. And every week, a returning character or a new screwball appears in camp and is tied to the plot. Matthias Jones started out very serious. I can remember my cousin asking me why Jones suddenly appeared at the scenes of murders. I, of course, had no answer, nor did I exaggerate character traits early on. Jones was based on our coach in high school, taking over from a nice guy the small town loved. But that coach, like Lark Larson, did not win many ball games. Lark Larson in the Jones series is a cartoon, like a buffoon, who, like many of the wacko citizens of Hamilton and beyond, have no clue that they are abnormally bizarre weirdos operating in a real world. And they all have a nickname. There are many old-time radio shows as well as television comedies that have these dumbbells on the loose. Jones, although frustrated by characters such as lumber owner, the reckless Arnie Dewars, or the know-it-all, untactful, incompetent Bucky Driscoll, puts up with this nonsensical behavior. Even with the accentuated character flaws and poor judgment, everyone has the potential to be proficient in something. So do the Jones characters. It's easy to forget this in everyday life. Many of the underestimated Jones series characters bring forth a certain insight that solves a murder. One more thing. Fletcher Patriarch Hamilton Fletcher controls the college and the town and is easily triggered, which is the genesis of more humor. Fletcher's character holds the Matthias Jones pretend world together on many levels. Coco Stefani is also a character who is easily annoyed. He likes to get to the point and not waste time. But he's Jones's best buddy, and it is Coco's long-lost gangster father from Vegas who is back in town in the latest Matthias Jones book. And wouldn't you know it, somebody is murdered. RPF. Johnny's Back in Town, Part 2. It's a good idea to murder somebody sooner rather than later. Sounds like a quote from Jack the Ripper. Unfortunately, we don't have quotes from Jack the Ripper because Jack's middle name was Incognito. Why is it we're all fascinated with murder? Same reason we study the Civil War or the Kennedy assassination. The good thing about being thrust into the world of the horrific, the vile, and the despicable is that we can exit out a door and step out of that world. For a breather, anyway. The things that we can't imagine being a part of or even witnessing is strangely tantalizing. Unless you're one of Jack the Ripper's victims, then you better learn to run like hell. In Johnny's Back in Town, I noticed, especially in the audiobook, there's a prolonged period in the beginning of the book before the murder is committed. I almost compressed chapters to get the murder underway. This is true for your normal murder mystery, but the Jones series isn't normal and has other elements. Towny humor, a subplot of a new dean at the college, and a focus on Coco. Coco's old man left his mother and brother when he was just a kid. Johnny Stefani bolted to Vegas to start a new life. It's appropriate that the bowling tournament for the charity about kids losing their father is the centerpiece of the murder scene. Here's where the story gets prolonged. The opportunity is for the Hamilton locals, as nutso as they are, to be in their element with Coco's temper flaring because he owns the bowling alley. Also, it's Coco's insight, not the cops, that establishes the logistics of the murder. When I was growing up, my mother would have a billion stories and background information on everyone who lived in our hometown, complete with nicknames. In Hamilton, there's always a backstory, usually told by Locke Larson, but Coco and the mob have backstories too. Of course, Jones sinks into that history. So when I'm telling the backstory in Jones, I'm probably engaging, albeit fiction, of my mother's embellishing of the past. Hamilton, New Hampshire is separated from the city of Prince William by the Devonshire Hills. Here are two markedly different geographic areas and lifestyles. The area is an amalgamation of Amherst, Massachusetts, where I went to school, and the elements of northeastern Massachusetts, where I grew up. Amherst is separated by the Holyoke Range from the greater Springfield area, and both Amherst and Northeastern are next to the cities of Northampton and Brockton. Father Jim Gallagher, Jones's priest and good friend, bridges the gap between Hamilton and Prince William and conveniently allows Jones lodging when he doesn't have his Jeep. Gallagher is also the moral conscience of Matthias Jones when Jones tiptoes through the assortment of mob characters from Boston to Providence, New York, and Vegas, and most of the mob likes Jones. A familiar motif develops in Johnny's Back in Town. Jones, usually with Coco and possibly one of the town's illustrious characters, investigates murders and are very often drawn outside the Hamilton area. Be prepared for car chases and shootouts. Remember, this is not reality. Rather, it's in a realm that most of us will never be in. Like riding a roller coaster, hopefully you're riding at Six Flags and not on the highway. If you read or listen to the Matthias Jones books, you'll see that the ruthless, the arrogant, the boastful, or the snobbish know-it-alls always get their comeuppance. The Marx Brothers, Moe, Larry, and Curly. And if you're from New England, you'll particularly enjoy Arnie Duis's stunt at the end of this book. I think there's a direct correlation from watching Seinfeld over and over again. I should mention Uncle Dulio. Dulio doesn't say much, but he's totally loyal to Coco and Jones. Waiting for an Uncle Dulio confrontation is well worth it. He started for Notre Dame in football and was in an elite military unit. Pushing 300 pounds, mostly muscle, he's always eating and provides a deus ex machina that even the gods would envy. RPF. Sometimes you have to take an objective look at what you've written. Yeah, right. Who's objective? The way I look at it is, Fitton, you better be objective. So how do you know if what you've written is flowing along the way it should? I don't have a little alarm bell in my head. It's a meltdown device that drives me crazy when something isn't right. Well, this morning, that meltdown device sent me into a tizzy. I spent the beginning of the book up in the colony in Canada in 2047, telling the story of how Patch Kincaid is done thinking about the Kennedy assassination. Kennedy was killed? That's it? Right? Oh, no. He gets back in time, and then he's excited about finding those who committed the crime, etc., etc. How can this writer from Cape Cod overlook the premise at the beginning of the book? Glad I woke up. How to fix. First of all, Patch has to make his feelings clear. Snip, snip, snip away on the turn of the dime Patch and create a little tension. Make him work for the conclusion that he hates the national security state of the future, which began in the 20th century. Overall, have his actions make sense, which is what I did. And while I'm at it, I never gave a clue to the reader as to the background information about what's coming up. So I did. Little repairs that seamlessly blend into the story. I like to pick out these intruders out of my story before I proceed too far. I don't want to have to rewrite hundreds of pages and change the storyline dramatically at the end. When I used a typewriter, early on, rewriting was, well, that's why some of the audio on my site is known as a freebie. I think I'll work on my cover for American Injustice as the fireworks explode not too far away. We'll see if I still like the cover by the time the novel is done sometime in the fall. Fireworks are done. Over and out, RPF.